The Varrock Dominion had ruled this section of the galaxy for so long that most species no longer remembered a time before it existed. Entire civilizations had risen beneath its shadow and disappeared beneath it. For over 8,000 years, the Dominion expanded slowly and methodically across the stars, absorbing worlds the way oceans absorbed rain. Some species resisted. Most did not. Resistance usually ended the same way, with surrender documents signed beneath the cold silver banners of the Dominion. Inside the Imperial War Chamber on Varrock Prime, silence carried the weight of centuries. The room itself had been carved directly into the black stone beneath the Capitol Mountain. No windows, no distractions. The Dominion believed leaders should look inward toward strategy, not outward toward beauty. At the center of the chamber floated a holographic map of human space. Small, scattered, fragile. Emperor Kaler sat motionless at the head of the long obsidian table, watching the stars rotate slowly above the chamber floor. He was ancient even by Dominion standards. 912 years old. 4 wars of expansion. 12 conquered civilizations. 0 defeats. The old emperor's pale gray skin looked almost metallic beneath the chamber lights, and his 4 amber eyes moved carefully from one general to the next as reports continued around him. The humans currently maintain 19 settled worlds, General Varrock said calmly. The tactical display shifted. Human colonies glowed blue across the map. Military assessment? Varrock folded his hands behind his back. The United Earth Fleet possesses approximately 1,000 combat-capable vessels. A few officers exchanged faint looks of amusement. 1,000. For a younger species it sounded impressive. For the Dominion, it was nothing. Varrock continued. Their industrial output is moderate. Defensive capability acceptable by regional standards. Technological adaptation speed slightly above average. Slightly? One council member asked. Varrock nodded once. The humans learn quickly. Another general gave a dismissive wave of his hand. Every species learns quickly during first contact wars. Quiet agreement spread across the chamber. Because that was true. At first, every species adapted. At first, every species fought desperately. At first, every species believed survival was possible. Then the Dominion arrived in full force. And hope disappeared. The holographic map zoomed inward toward the outer human colonies. A small world appeared. New Thessaly. Mining infrastructure. 3 orbital stations. Minimal fleet presence. General Varrock pointed toward it. The outer colonies are exposed and lightly defended. Once the border systems collapse, the remaining human worlds will lose logistical cohesion rapidly. How long? The Emperor asked. The chamber became very still. Because time frames mattered. Time frames measured competence. Varrock answered without hesitation. 5 months for complete military collapse. Pause. Then. Possibly less. Several members of the Imperial Council nodded approvingly. Efficient. Clean. Predictable. Exactly the kind of war the Dominion preferred. Emperor Kaler leaned back slightly in his throne. He studied the human systems in silence. 19 worlds. 1 species. A few hundred years into interstellar civilization. They were barely beginning. He thought about the trade routes crossing human territory. The mineral belts. The shipyards. The strategic position near the outer spiral corridors. Useful territory. Valuable territory. Easily acquired territory. Do the humans understand our military capability? The Emperor asked. Varrock allowed himself the faintest smile. They understand enough to be afraid. Soft laughter moved through the chamber. But General Saran did not laugh. Saran stood near the back of the room beside the intelligence division platforms, unusually quiet. The Emperor noticed immediately. You disagree? Every eye in the chamber turned toward Saran. Carefully the older general stepped forward. I believe humanity may resist longer than projections suggest. A faint irritation crossed several faces. One council member sighed openly. Based on what? Saran looked toward the human worlds floating above the table. History. The room stayed quiet. Saran continued. The humans evolved under unusually hostile conditions. Their recorded history contains near-constant internal warfare, environmental instability, resource conflict and mass-scale industrialized combat. Another general shrugged. That describes half the known species in the galaxy. No, Saran said quietly. It does not. Something in his tone caused the chamber to still slightly. The humans do not respond to pressure the way most species do. The Emperor's eyes narrowed faintly. How do they respond? Saran hesitated. That hesitation itself felt unusual. Then he answered carefully. They become dangerous. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then one of the council members laughed softly. Another joined him. Soon the entire chamber relaxed again. Dangerous. The word sounded absurd attached to a species this small, this temporary, this young. Emperor Kaler finally lifted one hand. The chamber immediately fell silent. He looked once more at the scattered lights of human space. Then he spoke two words that would eventually reshape the entire galaxy. Begin the invasion. The first human world fell on a Tuesday morning. Most people on New Thessaly never even saw the enemy arrive. They were asleep. The colony rested beneath a pale blue gas giant on the outer edge of human territory, a mining world built into deep canyon networks and reinforced dome cities scattered across the frozen plains. 280,000 people lived there. Miners, engineers, teachers, children. Ordinary people living ordinary lives beneath artificial skies. At 3:11 local time, the Orbital Defense Network detected an anomaly at the edge of the system. At first, the automated systems classified it as sensor distortion. Then the distortion multiplied. And multiplied again. Station Commander Elena Ward was halfway through her night rotation coffee when the first emergency alarm activated across Defense Platform 3. The warning lights flashed crimson across the command center. Multiple FTL emergence signatures detected. Her console updated again. Then again. Then again. Elena frowned. Because the numbers climbing across her screen did not make sense. Confirm sensor integrity, she ordered sharply. A technician swallowed. Already verified. How many contacts? The room stayed silent for half a second too long. Then someone answered quietly. 412. Every person in the command center stopped moving. No pirate fleet possessed those numbers. No regional power possessed those numbers. Only one civilization in this part of the galaxy could field a force that size. And they had just arrived over New Thessaly. The tactical display expanded. Massive enemy signatures spread across the orbital map like a growing disease. Battleships, carrier groups, siege platforms. And at the center of the formation, something enormous. One of the sensor officers stared at the reading. Commander. Elena looked up. The central vessel is over 4 kilometers long. Nobody spoke after that. Because ships that size were not built for diplomacy. Outside the station viewport, space itself seemed to split open as the Varric fleet emerged fully from faster-than-light transit. The warships moved slowly, calmly, without urgency, like predators entering a cage they already owned. Emergency sirens exploded across New Thessaly seconds later. Inside the colony cities, civilians woke to automated evacuation warnings echoing through residential sectors. Children cried. Transit systems overloaded instantly. People flooded underground shelters carrying whatever they could grab in 30 seconds. Some still believed it was a drill. Others already understood. The Dominion fleet formation shifted. Then the first transmission arrived. It appeared simultaneously across every military and civilian frequency on the colony. A deep mechanical voice filled the air. Human colony designated New Thessaly. You are now under authority of the Varric Dominion. All military resistance is to cease immediately. Failure to comply will result in orbital cleansing. The message repeated 3 times. Then the transmission ended. Inside Defense Platform 3, Commander Elena Ward stared at the tactical map. She had 6 defense platforms, 42 combat ships, limited missile reserves, no reinforcement possibility, against 412 enemy vessels. Her second officer looked toward her carefully. Orders. Elena looked back at the growing wall of enemy ships above the colony. Then toward the evacuation feeds flooding her side displays. Families running. Emergency crews moving. Children being carried into shelters. She knew the numbers. She knew the odds. She also knew something else. If New Thessaly surrendered now, the rest of humanity would never be ready for what came next. She opened a direct channel to Earth Command. Attach. Full sensor logs. Fleet compositions. Enemy ship scans. Tactical recordings. Emergency threat assessment. If they were going to die here, someone else needed to understand exactly what was coming. Transmission complete. The confirmation light blinked green. Elena stood slowly. Then she activated the station-wide combat channel. Every pilot, every defense crew, every ship captain, every soldier on New Thessaly heard her voice. Steady, controlled, calm enough to make the fear worse. This is Commander Ward. The Varrock Dominion has initiated hostile action against human territory. Pause. Outside the station windows, the first enemy weapons began charging. Orange light spread across the darkness. We hold as long as we can. The tactical officer whispered softly. They're moving into firing range. Elena nodded once. Then she gave the order that would later spread across human space like scripture. Hold the line. The first Dominion cannon fired 6 seconds later. And the sky above New Thessaly caught fire. The battle for New Thessaly lasted 8 hours. Earth watched all of them. The quantum relay network carried the footage across human space in real time. Defense platforms exploding. Orbital ships breaking apart. Emergency evacuation broadcast. Burning debris falling through the atmosphere. Every screen on Earth carried the war. People stopped walking in the middle of cities. Traffic froze. Restaurants went silent. Inside a crowded train station in Tokyo, hundreds of strangers stood shoulder to shoulder beneath giant public displays watching human warships die above New Thessaly. Nobody spoke. Because nobody had ever seen anything like this before. The Dominion fleet moved with terrifying precision. No wasted fire. No reckless aggression. No emotion. Just systematic destruction. Defense platforms vanished one after another beneath concentrated bombardment. Human cruisers tried counterattack formations. The Dominion dismantled them in minutes. At 11:42 Earth Standard Time, Commander Elena Ward's flagship lost primary engines. At 11:51, the vessel's port batteries stopped responding. At 12:03, the ship drifted directly into the path of 3 Dominion battleships. Still firing. Still fighting. Still refusing surrender orders. The final transmission arrived 7 minutes later. The recording quality was poor. Static flooded most of the channel. Warning alarms screamed in the background. Metal groaned somewhere behind her. But Elena's voice remained calm. If this reaches command. The transmission cut briefly. Returned. Their fleet size is beyond projection estimates. Another violent impact shook the recording. Someone off-channel was shouting. Another voice was crying. Elena ignored all of it. Do not negotiate from fear. The bridge lights behind her flickered violently. Then came the final sentence. The one humanity would remember long after the war ended. Hold the line. The channel died. 43 seconds later, New Thessaly's orbital network ceased to exist. The Dominion bombardment began immediately after. Across Earth, people watched fire spread across an entire world. And something changed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Quietly. Dangerously. Inside United Earth Defense Command headquarters beneath Geneva, Admiral Haruto Kane stood in absolute silence before the tactical displays. The casualty estimates updated continuously beside him. Dead. Missing. Unconfirmed. The numbers climbed too quickly to emotionally process. One of his intelligence officers finally spoke. Sir. Kane did not answer. Because he was staring at the wider strategic map. And New Thessaly was not the only system under attack. Red warning indicators were appearing everywhere. Kepler Gate. Orion Reach. Vesta Colony. Harrow Station. 6 simultaneous invasions. The Dominion had not launched a raid. They had launched extermination-scale conquest operations across the entire outer frontier. Behind Kane, another officer whispered. How many ships do they actually have? Nobody knew. That was the terrifying part. At United Earth Assembly headquarters in Nairobi, Secretary General Amara Devereux received the first complete battlefield report at 6:14 local time. She read it once quickly. Then again much slower. Outside her office window, the city was waking up peacefully beneath the sunrise. People walking to work. Children heading to school. Normal life continuing for a few more minutes. Completely unaware that humanity had just entered the most dangerous war in its history. Her secure channel activated. Admiral Kane appeared instantly. Exhausted. Still in combat uniform. How bad is it? She asked. Kane looked at her for a long moment before answering. Worse than the public reports. He transmitted the latest numbers directly to her console. Projected enemy invasion force, 2,700 to 3,100 warships. Amara felt her stomach tighten. That was not a fleet. That was civilization-scale military power. They planned this for years, Kane continued quietly. Multiple synchronized assaults. Deep logistics preparation. Long-range staging corridors. Another pause. Then. This is not a border war. Amara finished the sentence for him. It's an extinction war. Neither of them spoke after that. because both understood what those words meant. Humanity was not facing pirates, or raiders, or a regional empire. Humanity was facing something ancient, something enormous, something that had already decided the outcome. And across every human world, people were still watching New Thessaly burn. The Varric Dominion believed the war was already over. That was their first real mistake. On Varric Prime, victory celebrations filled the capital for weeks. Imperial media channels broadcast endless footage of burning human fleets and conquered colonies beneath triumphant military music. Dominion commentators discussed humanity the way historians discussed extinct civilizations. Past tense. The Council of Generals began debating which noble houses would administer the occupied human systems after surrender. Trade projections were calculated. Resource extractions planned. Occupation governors selected. Everything proceeded exactly the way Dominion wars always proceeded. Except for one thing. The humans were not surrendering. General Saran noticed it first. Late at night inside his private intelligence chamber, he sat alone reading intercepted human transmissions across hundreds of military channels. He knew what defeated species sounded like. After 4 centuries of warfare, he knew the pattern perfectly. Fear. Disorganization. Political fractures. Desperate diplomatic outreach. Quiet discussions about acceptable surrender terms. Human communications contained none of it. Instead, he found words that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Production quotas. Shipyard expansion. Fleet restructuring. Emergency mobilization. Resource allocation. Reserve manufacturing. At first, Saran thought the humans were trying to stabilize their collapsing defenses. Then he realized something worse. They were preparing for a long war. One transmission in particular stayed with him. A damaged human cruiser near Kepler Gate transmitted a final message moments before destruction. Saran replayed the recording 3 times. Not because of the tactical information. Because of the tone. "We are not retreating," the human captain said calmly. "We are buying time." Saran leaned back slowly in silence. Buying time for what? Across human space, the answer was already taking shape. Every major shipyard on Earth had shifted to full wartime production. Civilian manufacturing plants were nationalized within days. Mining corporations converted transport platforms into armored carriers. Commercial fusion plants redirected power toward military infrastructure. Entire orbital districts stopped sleeping. The shipyards above Luna burned with welding light 24 hours a day. New destroyers rolled from assembly lines before crews were fully trained. Half-finished carriers were launched months early. Freighters received missile batteries welded directly onto their hulls. Nothing looked elegant anymore. Humanity had stopped building for perfection. Humanity was building for survival. At Fort Resolute, a deep space logistics station near the outer sectors, Commander Elena Reyes stepped onto the main docking platform and stopped walking. Because the station no longer looked like a station. It looked like a civilization preparing for apocalypse. The entire structure vibrated beneath constant industrial activity. Construction drones flooded the docking corridors. Thousands of workers moved through the station carrying equipment, ammunition, reactor components, weapon systems. Every display screen showed casualty reports beside production schedules. Nobody complained. Nobody panicked. They just kept moving. A young logistics officer approached Reyes holding a data pad. "Admiral Kane wants you in strategic command immediately." She took the data pad while continuing through the station. The briefing summary appeared across the screen. Current fleet losses, catastrophic. Projected Dominion advance, continuing. Estimated human survival odds, declining. Then she reached the final section. New directive, long-duration war preparation. Reyes slowed slightly. Long duration. Not evacuation planning. Not surrender contingency. Inside Strategic Command, Admiral Kane looked like a man surviving entirely on exhaustion and stubbornness. Holographic fleet maps covered every wall around him. Human territory glowed red across half the display. He motioned Reyes closer. "How good are you with incomplete intelligence?" he asked immediately. She frowned slightly. "I manage." "We need better than manage." Kane enlarged the strategic map. Dominion occupation zones spread across human space in massive controlled sectors. Cold, organized, efficient. "They think we're collapsing," Kane said quietly. Reyes remained silent. "Because they were collapsing." Kane looked directly at her. "That assumption is the only advantage we have left." He activated another layer of the tactical display. And suddenly the map changed. Hidden shipyards. emergency fleet routes, reserve manufacturing hubs, weapons production sectors. The scale of it made Reyes stare. Every surviving human world was mobilizing simultaneously. Not for defense. For reconstruction. For retaliation. "We are rebuilding the fleet," Kane said. "No," Reyes corrected softly. Kane looked at her. She looked back at the impossible scale of military production spreading across human space. "You're building an invasion force." For the first time in days, the Admiral smiled slightly. "Yes," he said. "We are." Then his expression darkened again. "But the Dominion cannot realize that yet." Outside the station viewport, thousands of construction lights burned against the darkness like artificial stars. And deep inside the unfinished shipyards of humanity, revenge was beginning to take shape. The first Dominion supply convoy disappeared without warning. No distress call. No debris field. No survivors. One moment the convoy existed on long-range tracking systems. The next, nothing. At first, Imperial Command blamed navigational failure. Then a second convoy vanished 3 days later. Then a communication relay station stopped responding near the outer occupied sectors. Then another. And another. Inside the Dominion Strategic Intelligence Center, General Saran stood motionless before the tactical displays while red warning indicators multiplied slowly across the map. Something was changing. He could feel it. Not emotionally. Mathematically. Wars had patterns. Every species followed them eventually. Losses created panic. Panic created disorder. Disorder created collapse. Humanity was not following the pattern. A junior intelligence officer approached carefully. "General?" Saran did not look away from the display. "Report." The humans launched coordinated strikes against 3 logistics corridors in the Kever sector. "How many ships?" "That's the problem, sir." Now Saran turned. The officer swallowed. "We don't know." A silence followed. Because Dominion intelligence always knew. That was the foundation of Imperial warfare. Information first. Victory second. "What do we have?" Saran asked quietly. The officer activated the combat recordings. The footage began. A Dominion fueling station drifted silently above a gas giant. Routine operations. Cargo transfers. Docking procedures. Normal activity. Then the alarm started. Human warships emerged from FTL directly inside the defense perimeter. Not dozens. Hundreds. Fast. Precise. Violent. The recording dissolved into chaos almost immediately. Missile impacts. Defense grids collapsing. Human attack formations moving with terrifying coordination. The station commander tried issuing emergency orders. 3 seconds later his command deck exploded. Saran watched the footage without blinking. How long did the engagement last? 32 minutes. And the human fleet? Gone before reinforcements arrived. The room became very quiet. Because that was impossible. Collapsing species did not launch deep strike military operations. They defended. They retreated. They begged for negotiation. They did not attack critical logistics infrastructure 70 light-years behind enemy lines. Saran replayed the footage again. This time focusing on the attack formations. Not random. Not desperate. Targeted. Every human strike group hit something essential. Fuel reserves. Communication relays. Navigation systems. Supply coordination hubs. The humans were not attacking emotionally. They were dismantling infrastructure. A cold feeling settled slowly into Saran's chest. "Expand the map," he ordered. The tactical display widened across the chamber. Dozens of recent attacks appeared now. At first they looked disconnected. Then Saran started tracing lines between them. His expression changed immediately. Because suddenly he understood. The humans were attacking load-bearing points. Not territory. Not population centers. The structures holding the entire occupation network together. One destroyed relay station forced longer communication routes. Longer routes created response delays. Response delays created isolated fleets. Isolated fleets became vulnerable. The humans were not fighting the Dominion directly. They were pulling it apart piece by piece. A young analyst looked toward him nervously. "General, what does this mean?" Saran stared at the growing web of damaged logistics corridors spreading across occupied space. Then he answered with complete honesty. "It means the humans were preparing this while we celebrated victory." Nobody spoke after that. Because suddenly every recent intelligence report felt different. Every intercepted transmission. Every missing convoy. Every unexplained fleet movement. All of it connected. And the terrifying part was the scale. How many ships do they actually have? Another officer whispered. Saran did not answer immediately, because for the first time since the war began, he truly did not know. That realization frightened him more than the attacks themselves. He turned slowly back toward the tactical display. Somewhere inside human territory, entire fleets were moving through darkness beyond Dominion tracking. Building, expanding, preparing. And deep in his instincts, General Saran understood something his emperor still refused to see. Humanity was no longer trying to survive. Humanity was preparing to win. Far above the chamber, the artificial night sky of Varric Prime glittered peacefully beyond the capital towers. But out in the dark between stars, something dangerous was waking up. The Dominion garrison in the Kareth system was in the middle of a victory celebration when the human fleet arrived. Music echoed through the command station. Imperial officers drank beneath silver Dominion banners while enormous holographic displays replayed footage from early human defeats. The war was considered effectively finished. Officially, the remaining human resistance had been classified as localized instability. Nothing more. Garrison Commander Telvax was halfway through a speech about the final pacification phase when every light inside the station turned crimson. The music stopped instantly. Emergency alarms exploded across the chamber. One of the tactical officers looked up from his console, pale with disbelief. Multiple FTL signatures. Telvax frowned. Whose? The officer swallowed hard. Human. The room froze. That single word felt impossible. Human fleets were supposed to be scattered. Damaged. Retreating. Not here. Not this deep inside occupied territory. The tactical display activated. And suddenly the entire chamber went silent. Because ships just kept appearing. One after another. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Human destroyers. Carriers. Missile cruisers. Attack formations dropping directly into the center of the Dominion logistics corridor like blades through fabric. Telvax stared at the numbers. Impossible. But the humans were already moving. They did not open diplomatic channels. They did not broadcast warnings. They attacked immediately. The first missile wave hit the fuel depots before Dominion defense systems fully activated. Massive explosions spread across the orbital platforms in violent chains of white fire. A second human strike group targeted communications relays. A third hit navigation arrays. Every attack synchronized perfectly. Precise. Disciplined. Cold. The Dominion fleet tried reorganizing into defensive formation. Too slow. The humans had already mapped the system. They knew exactly where to strike. Outside the station viewport, entire docking platforms disappeared beneath coordinated bombardment. Human warships moved through the chaos aggressively, ignoring defensive fire long enough to complete target objectives before vanishing back into formation. No hesitation. No confusion. Only momentum. Inside the tactical chamber, officers shouted overlapping reports. Fuel reserves compromised. Relay stations offline. Dockyard integrity collapsing. We've lost primary targeting. Telvax turned toward the tactical display again, and finally understood the real problem. The humans were not attacking randomly. Every strike removed something essential. Fuel. Communications. Coordination. Mobility. They were not trying to destroy the system. They were trying to cripple it. The station shook violently as another explosion rippled through the outer platforms. Then came the most terrifying report yet. Additional human signatures emerging. Telvax stared. More ships dropped from FTL behind the station. How many ships did humanity have now? Nobody knew anymore. That uncertainty spread through the chamber like poison. For the first time since the invasion began, Dominion officers looked afraid. The battle lasted 37 minutes. When it ended, the fueling depots were gone. Supply stations destroyed. Communications crippled. Orbital shipyards burning. And the human fleet? Gone. Vanished back into faster-than-light transit before reinforcement fleets arrived. The surviving Dominion officers stood inside the wreckage of the command station in absolute silence. Because none of this fit the model. Humanity was supposed to be collapsing. Instead, human fleets were appearing everywhere. Fast, organized, relentless. Across occupied territory, similar attacks erupted almost simultaneously. Supply corridors vanished. Relay stations fell dark. Occupation fleets lost coordination. Entire Dominion sectors became isolated within hours. And with every attack, The fear grew. Inside Strategic Command on Earth, Admiral Kane watched the operation reports arrive one after another across the massive tactical display. Success indicators spread across occupied space. Kara, Velos, Orion Reach, Meridian Corridor. The first phase of retaliation was working. Commander Alina Reyes stood beside him reviewing casualty reports. Human losses, acceptable. Dominion losses, catastrophic. But Kane's expression remained cold. Because this was only the beginning. Reyes looked toward him. The strikes caused more damage than projections estimated. Kane nodded once. They underestimated how fast we rebuilt. Outside the command center viewport, new warships continued leaving orbital construction yards non-stop. Humanity was still expanding the fleet. Still building. Still accelerating. One of the communications officers turned suddenly. Sir. Kane looked up. Intercepted Dominion transmission. Priority level? The officer hesitated. Highest. The room quieted. The recording activated across the chamber. A Dominion officer's voice filled the air. Shaken. Uncertain. Fear barely controlled beneath military discipline. These are not isolated raids. Static interrupted briefly. Then the voice returned. The humans are conducting coordinated infrastructure warfare across the entire occupation zone. Another pause. Then. We may have significantly underestimated human recovery capability. Kane listened silently. Then he looked back toward the expanding fleet projections glowing across the tactical display. For 7 months humanity had bled, burned, retreated, watched colonies fall, watched worlds occupied. Now the galaxy was finally beginning to understand something important. Humans could survive pain for a very long time. But once they stopped surviving, they became something else entirely. And throughout the fleet, among pilots and soldiers and exhausted crews moving through endless war preparations, the campaign had already earned a new unofficial name. Payback Season. The first human colony liberated by the UEDF was Meridian Station. The battle lasted 71 hours. Every minute of it was brutal. Dominion forces had fortified the colony heavily after the early human counterattacks began. Orbital minefields surrounded the approach lanes. Defense platforms covered every major entry vector. Ground batteries hid beneath civilian infrastructure. The Varrock had turned the colony into a fortress. Admiral Kane attacked anyway. The human fleet arrived above Meridian without announcement. Thousands of ships emerging from FTL in disciplined formation, their engine signatures flooding the system sensors faster than Dominion tracking systems could process. Inside the occupied colony below, civilians watched the sky ignite with weapons fire. For 14 months they had lived beneath Dominion rule. 14 months of checkpoints, curfews, armed patrols, foreign banners hanging above human streets. Some people had stopped believing liberation would ever come. Then the sky exploded. Commander Alina Reyes stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Resolute watching the tactical display fill with combat data. Enemy defense grid, active. Minefields, partially cleared. Dominion fleet response, incoming fast. The bridge lights flickered beneath distant impacts. One of the sensor officers looked up sharply. 3 enemy carriers approaching from the eastern orbital lane. Reyes did not hesitate. Push forward. Commander, that corridor is still mined. I know. Her voice remained calm. Cold. Focused. Push forward anyway. The Resolute accelerated directly into the defensive perimeter. Behind it, hundreds of human warships followed without slowing. The first mines detonated seconds later. A destroyer vanished in white fire. Another ship lost engines. Fragments of burning metal scattered across the orbital lane. But the fleet kept moving. Because stopping meant losing momentum. And momentum was everything now. The Dominion Defense Network opened fire simultaneously. Orbital cannons hammered the advancing human formation. Missile spreads flooded space. Entire sectors of the battlefield disappeared beneath overlapping weapons fire. Still the humans kept advancing. Fast. Aggressive. Relentless. Inside the Dominion command station above Meridian, General Torvac stared at the incoming human formations with growing disbelief. They should be retreating, one officer whispered. But they were not retreating. They were getting closer. Human ships punched through minefields that should have stopped them. Damaged cruisers continued fighting while literally burning apart. Strike groups ignored defensive fire long enough to complete target objectives before breaking formation. The humans fought like people who had already accepted losses before the battle even began. That frightened the Dominion commanders more than the fleet itself. Because species willing to absorb casualties willingly were difficult to stop. Then the human carriers launched their fighter wings. Thousands of strike craft flooded the battlefield at once. The tactical display dissolved into chaos. Human pilots moved aggressively through defensive fire, targeting shield generators, weapons arrays, communication hubs. Not random destruction. Systematic dismantling. One Dominion officer stared at the combat feeds in horror. They're taking the defense network apart piece by piece. General Torvak finally understood. The humans had studied them. Every response pattern. Every formation structure. Every tactical instinct. The Dominion had invaded humanity expecting primitive resistance. Instead, they had trained an enemy. After 30 hours of continuous orbital combat, the outer defense grid collapsed. Human ground forces began landing immediately afterward. The fighting moved into the colony cities. Street by street. Building by building. Slow. Dirty. Personal. Human soldiers advanced through neighborhoods that had spent over a year under occupation. Some civilians emerged from shelters crying openly when they saw human armor again. Others simply stood frozen in disbelief. A young UEDF Marine paused briefly near a damaged transit station as an elderly woman grabbed his arm with shaking hands. "You came back," she whispered. The Marine looked exhausted. His armor burned. Part of his shoulder plating missing. But he answered immediately. "Of course we did." Then he kept moving toward the front. 71 hours after the battle began, the final Dominion warship above Meridian Station was destroyed. The all-clear signal spread across the colony. And for several seconds, nobody reacted. Because after 14 months of occupation, freedom felt unreal. Then cheering started somewhere inside the Eastern District. Then another. Then hundreds more. Across Meridian Station, human voices filled the streets again. Commander Reyes opened a direct channel to the Colony Administration Center. A tired civilian operator answered almost immediately. His voice sounded rough. Exhausted. Like someone barely holding himself together emotionally. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Reyes looked at the tactical map one last time. No enemy signatures remained. "Yes," she said. A long silence followed. Then the operator finally spoke again. "They told us humanity would never come back." Reyes looked out across the battlefield burning beneath the colony sky. They were wrong. Behind her, the bridge crew continued preparing the next deployment routes. Because Meridian Station was only the beginning. There were still 15 occupied worlds left. And humanity had finally remembered how to fight angry. The last occupied human world was liberated 14 months after the war began. Its name was Pharaoh's Reach. A mining colony near the edge of the outer sectors. The battle for it lasted only 19 hours. Compared to Meridian. Compared to New Thessaly. Compared to the first terrible months of the war. It almost felt easy. That terrified the Dominion more than anything else. Because now humanity was winning too efficiently. Inside the command bridge of the UEDF flagship Vanguard, Admiral Kane stood silently before the tactical displays while reports flooded in from across liberated territory. Final casualty estimates. Civilian recovery operations. Fleet repair schedules. Occupation cleanup logistics. Victory. Humanity had survived. But nobody on the bridge celebrated. Not yet. Because every officer in that room understood something important. The war was not ending. It was changing direction. One of the communications officers looked up carefully. "Sir." Kane did not turn. "The fleet is awaiting final orders." The bridge became completely silent. Thousands of ships waited beyond the viewport outside. Carrier groups. Siege fleets. Destroyers. Heavy assault formations. The largest military force humanity had ever assembled. All pointed toward the same destination. The Varric border. Commander Reyes stepped beside Kane quietly. "The council is still divided." "I know. Some of them want negotiations." Kane finally looked toward her. "And you?" Reyes was silent for a moment. Outside the viewport, hundreds of warships drifted against the stars like an artificial constellation. She thought about New Thessaly. About occupied colonies. About burned cities. About 14 months of human worlds living beneath foreign banners. Then she answered honestly. "I think if we stop now." Her eyes remained fixed on the fleet. "They'll do this again someday." Kane nodded once. Because that was exactly the problem. The Dominion had attacked humanity because it believed humanity was weak. If the war ended here, then eventually another empire would make the same calculation. Another ancient civilization. Another invasion fleet. Another burning colony. No. This war needed to become something else. A lesson. Deep inside Dominion territory, General Saran watched long-range intelligence feeds with growing dread. The human fleet formations had changed. They were no longer defensive deployments. No longer liberation task forces. The humans were consolidating into invasion groups. Massive ones. One of the Dominion analysts spoke nervously beside him. General? Saran already knew. They're crossing the border. The analyst swallowed hard. Yes. The tactical display updated. Human fleet vectors extended directly into Dominion territory. Straight toward the inner systems. Straight toward the core worlds. Straight toward Varric Prime itself. For several seconds, nobody in the intelligence chamber spoke. Because the idea itself felt impossible. No species invaded the Dominion. No species survived long enough to try. But humanity was not stopping. They were accelerating. Inside the Imperial Palace, Emperor Kaler received the reports in silence. The old ruler stood beside the massive chamber windows overlooking the capital city lights far below. They would not dare, one council member insisted. Another nodded quickly. The humans reclaimed their territory. That was always their objective. Saran entered the chamber without waiting for permission. Every eye turned toward him immediately. The Emperor noticed his expression at once. You disagree. Saran walked toward the center tactical display slowly. Then activated it. The holographic map expanded across the chamber. Human fleet movements illuminated the darkness like advancing fire. The room became very still. Because now everyone could see it. The vectors. The formations. The scale. Humanity was not posturing. Humanity was coming. They rebuilt faster than projected, Saran said quietly. No, Kaler replied sharply. They exhausted themselves reclaiming their worlds. Saran looked directly at the Emperor. With respect, my Emperor? He enlarged the fleet estimates again. This is not an exhausted fleet. Silence. One council member whispered softly. How many ships? Saran answered immediately. Approximately 7,000 combat-capable vessels. The chamber froze. Even the Emperor said nothing. Because 14 months earlier, humanity had barely survived the opening invasion. Now they possessed one of the largest active military forces in known space. And it was moving directly toward the Dominion. Kaler stared at the tactical map for a very long time. Then finally asked the question nobody else wanted to say aloud. What do the humans want? Saran thought carefully before answering. Because after studying humanity for nearly 2 years, he believed he finally understood. They want the galaxy to remember this war. Outside the palace windows, thunder rolled across the distant mountains of Varric Prime. And far beyond the border, human fleets entered Dominion space for the first time in history. The first Dominion core world surrendered without a fight. Its name was Velcaris. Population, 1.8 billion. Military importance, moderate. Psychological importance, massive. Because Dominion worlds did not surrender. Not ever. When the human fleet arrived in orbit above Velcaris, the planetary defense network activated immediately. Orbital cannons charged. Defense fleets moved into formation. Emergency broadcasts flooded civilian channels across the planet. People prepared for invasion. Then something unexpected happened. Admiral Kane opened direct communications instead of firing. The transmission appeared across every military frequency in the system. His voice was calm, controlled, cold enough to feel dangerous. This is Admiral Nathan Kane of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We are not here for civilians. The Dominion commanders listened in silence. Kane continued. Deactivate military defenses. Surrender all combat infrastructure. Your population centers will remain untouched. Inside the Velcaris Defense Command Center, officers stared at each other uncertainly. One commander whispered, "It's a trick." Maybe. But outside the planet, 7,000 human warships waited in absolute silence. The same fleet that had crushed every defensive line between the border and the inner systems. The same fleet now sitting directly above their world. Waiting. The governor of Velcaris made the decision 21 minutes later. Planetary shields powered down. Defense batteries deactivated. The surrender transmission was sent. And across the Dominion, fear spread for the first time in Imperial history. Because now the impossible was real. Humanity had crossed the border. Humanity had survived the counteroffensive. Humanity had reached the core systems. And they were still advancing. Inside the Imperial War Chamber on Varric Prime, The atmosphere had changed completely. The old confidence was gone. No victory celebrations remained. No arrogant speeches. No discussions about conquest. Only silence. And fear carefully disguised as strategy. Emperor Kaler stood before the massive tactical display while new reports arrived continuously. Lost system. Retreating fleets. Collapsing defensive corridors. Human advance continuing. The Emperor looked older now. Not physically. Something else. Like certainty itself had begun breaking apart inside him. They should have accepted negotiations, one council member said quietly. Saran almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because they still did not understand. You invaded their worlds, Saran said flatly. You burned their cities. You occupied their colonies for over a year. His voice remained calm. But the true mistake. He looked toward the tactical map. Was teaching humanity this war could only end one way. Nobody answered him. Because deep down, they all knew he was right now. A military officer rushed into the chamber suddenly. Emergency report from the Korth defense line. Kaler turned sharply. Well? The officer hesitated. Then answered carefully. The line collapsed in 4 hours. Silence. That defensive line had been projected to hold for 3 weeks. Another officer spoke quickly afterward. Human fleet formations continue adapting faster than expected. Another. Occupation reserve fleets are failing to regroup. Another. Several outer governors are requesting surrender authorization. The room felt smaller suddenly. Like the empire itself was shrinking in real time. Kaler looked toward Saran slowly. And for the first time since the war began, the emperor asked a real question. How did this happen? Saran answered immediately. Because we mistook restraint for weakness. The chamber fell silent again. Outside the palace windows, Varric Prime glittered beneath the night sky exactly as it always had. Ancient towers. Imperial monuments. Gardens shaped across centuries. A civilization that believed itself eternal. But now human fleets were moving closer every hour. Closer to the capital. Closer to the throne world. Closer to the emperor himself. One of the council members finally whispered the thought none of them wanted spoken aloud. What if they reach Varric Prime? Nobody answered immediately. Because nobody knew what humanity intended to do once they arrived. That uncertainty terrified the Dominion more than the invasion itself. Not destruction. Not conquest. Uncertainty. Saran understood it clearly now. Humanity was not fighting for territory anymore. They were creating something larger. A warning. A memory so violent and undeniable that no civilization in the galaxy would ever again casually discuss invading Earth. And the terrifying part was that it was working. Deep in Dominion space, entire fleets were already retreating before the humans arrived. Because soldiers fight differently once they realize the enemy cannot be psychologically broken. Far beyond the palace walls, warning sirens echoed faintly through the capital night. Human fleets had entered the outer defense perimeter of the core worlds. And for the first time in 8,000 years, the Varric Dominion understood what it felt like to be afraid. The UEDF fleet arrived above Varric Prime at dawn. The capital world of the Dominion had not seen an enemy fleet in over 8,000 years. Now thousands of human warships filled the skies above it. The orbital defense grid opened fire immediately. Massive plasma batteries erupted across the upper atmosphere. Defense platforms unleashed coordinated bombardments powerful enough to shatter moons. Human ships burned. Several carriers vanished beneath concentrated fire. But the fleet kept advancing. Slowly. Relentlessly. Like something inevitable. Inside the flagship Vanguard, Admiral Kane stood silently before the tactical display while battle reports streamed across the bridge. Outer defense ring, collapsing. Human casualties, heavy. Dominion resistance, intensifying near the capital perimeter. Commander Reyes stepped beside him. The defense grid is stronger than projections. Kane nodded once. They're protecting the throne world. Outside the massive bridge viewport, Varric Prime rotated beneath the fleet. Beautiful. Ancient. The center of an empire that had once believed itself untouchable. Kane stared at it for several long seconds. Then finally spoke. Open a direct channel. The communications officer hesitated. To whom, sir? Kane's eyes never left the planet below. The Emperor. Moments later, every military and civilian channel across Varric Prime activated simultaneously. Billions of Dominion citizens heard the same message at once. This is Admiral Nathan Kane of the United Earth Defense Fleet. Static crackled briefly across the transmission. Then came the sentence that froze the entire planet. "We are here." Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. Then, "Come out." Inside the Imperial Palace, Emperor Kaler stood motionless in the center of the war chamber, listening to the transmission echo through the silent room. Nobody spoke afterward, because no one knew what to say anymore. The humans had done the impossible. They had crossed the galaxy, broken the Dominion fleets, reached the capital, and now they sat in orbit above the throne world itself, waiting. General Saran stood near the tactical display, watching the latest battlefield projections update continuously. The numbers were hopeless now. Every model ended the same way. Human victory. The Emperor looked toward him slowly. "What happens if we surrender?" Saran answered honestly. "I think humanity leaves." Several council members looked shocked. "You believe that?" one demanded. "Yes." "Why?" Saran looked toward the stars visible beyond the chamber windows. "Because this was never about extermination." He turned back toward them. "It was about certainty." Nobody understood. So he explained. "The humans are not here to destroy the Dominion. They are here to make sure the Dominion remembers." Outside the palace, warning sirens echoed across the capital city. Civilians flooded underground shelters. Military transports raced through the streets. Orbital fire lit the upper atmosphere like artificial lightning. And still, the human fleet did not begin planetary bombardment. That terrified the Emperor more than anything else. Because destruction was understandable. Occupation was understandable. But restraint? Restraint after everything the Dominion had done? That felt dangerous in a way Kaler could not fully explain. 20 hours later, the outer defense network collapsed. Human ground forces began landing near the Imperial District immediately afterward. The fighting inside the capital lasted 4 days. Street by street, tower by tower. Dominion soldiers resisted fiercely because this was their home now. Not distant colonies. Not occupation zones. Home. Commander Reyes led the ground advance personally through the outer palace districts. The city around them burned beneath constant combat. Destroyed vehicles littered the ceremonial roads. Smoke rolled between ancient towers built thousands of years before humanity had discovered electricity. One of Reyes' officers looked toward the palace ahead. "We're almost there." She nodded silently. Because everyone understood what this moment meant. The entire war had been moving toward this city. Toward this building. Toward the man waiting inside it. On the 5th day, human forces breached the Imperial Palace gates. The remaining palace guard fought to the end. Not because they believed victory was possible. Because they had sworn loyalty to the Emperor himself. The final resistance collapsed near sunset. Then suddenly, the fighting stopped. An uneasy silence spread through the palace corridors. Commander Reyes walked slowly through the shattered throne chamber with armed soldiers behind her. At the far end of the room, Emperor Kaler stood alone beside the massive observation windows overlooking his capital. He looked older now, smaller somehow.